1990 was a rough year for the Arctic coastline, and that includes Alaska. In autumn, the ice pack hadn't yet reached the shore, making it nearly impossible for the polar bears to hunt for seals. It's not that the bears can't hunt underwater or on land, but the ones that have the ability to do so well enough to feed themselves are in the minority. This is the kind of season where the weak are cold and only the strongest, most prolific hunters make it out alive. And it's thanks to this die-off, where the weaker genes don't continue on. The polar bears have managed to keep their title of world's most feared bear intact for centuries. By December, the bears across Canada, Alaska, Norway, Greenland, and Russia all reported a bigger than average amount of underweight bears around the Arctic Circle. No one could be completely sure how severe the situation was. It's not exactly like people can just walk up to a polar bear and examine them up close. We are talking about the most aggressive species of bear in the world after all. At the beginning of autumn, 2 biologists flew out with the intention of finding out exactly how serious the situation was for the polar bears in Alaska and how far the ice pack was from the shore. But what they found, no one knows. The 2 biologists, their pilot, and the plane went missing, and to this day, no trace of them or the airplane's been found. So for now, faraway observations would just have to keep everyone satisfied until something drastic happened. There was no way to tell for sure. In reality, all they had to do was to look more closely at the Alaskan coastline, where an adult male had just started moving towards the populated settlements. It was haggard, tired, and even from a distance, under all that thick fur, any observer would have been able to tell this specimen was about to die of starvation. The average adult male polar bear weighs around 1,200 pounds, and that's just the average. The bigger ones can reach 2,000 pounds, but this wanderer weighed only 572 pounds, half of what it should have. The past few months' catches were few and far in between. If it weren't for a handful of scavenging expeditions taken from more prolific hunters, it would have died months ago. And these last few weeks, it hadn't had anything to eat at all. As it stood, it might have had a week or so left to live. If it didn't do something fast, it wasn't going to make it at all. Its head pounding, feet dragging, it made its way to the scent that it always avoided, the smell of human habitation. These creatures weren't much in terms of fat, but at least they couldn't swim away as fast as the seals could. Point Lay, Alaska, with a population of less than 200, was its only option ahead. So that's where it headed, right where Carl and Becca Stalker were out enjoying a late afternoon walk in the middle of town. The walk was slow going because Becca was 8 months pregnant. Carl had wanted her to stay indoors, worried about the December snow and pools of ice that she could slip on. But Becca was insistent on going to get the salt and vinegar chips from the small corner store that she'd been craving all week. She was going to stretch her swollen legs come hell or high water. Poor Becca waddled and groaned, looking like a bundled up, miserable little penguin, and Carl assisted her however he could, barely keeping the smile off his face. He thought he was the happiest 28-year-old in the world, with the most beautiful, albeit a little pouty, wife that a guy could dream of having. The 2 of them were so focused on getting Becca down the street without slipping that they didn't even realize that a fully grown polar bear was walking straight at them. It had simply walked into the main street like it belonged there. Or maybe it was so delirious that it couldn't even conceive the thought of going into stealth mode. Had the couple seen it in the distance, they'd have been able to escape with very little effort. Unfortunately, they were so engrossed with each other, their giggles echoing through the mist, that it practically stumbled on top of them. Becca saw it first, just 12 yards from them, a fearsome silhouette outlined against the stark white mist behind it. Carl reacted instinctively by reaching into his pocket to grab the only weapon at his disposal, a simple pocket knife he'd gotten from his father when he was 16. He shoved Becca behind him and told her to run, firmly placing himself between his wife and unborn child. Becca ran as fast as her bloated ankles could manage, struggling to keep her balance. The last thing she heard was a vicious snarl and a bellow like a charging bull from Carl. Carl had resigned himself to his fate. He knew he was going to die, but damn it, he was going to make sure Becca and the baby made it out alive. What Becca heard was no scream of fear. It was a war cry, and Carl was the one charging into battle, armed only with a gas station pocket knife and a gut with more courage than men twice his age. The bear charged into him, its claws flailing madly. They connected with the ice sheet with the force of a truck, but Carl didn't take a moment to catch the breath that was knocked out of him. He ignored the nails tearing through his thick winter jacket, raking down his back, shredding his skin down to his spine. He paid no mind to the teeth ripping into his exposed face, peeling his scalp, cheeks, and nose off the bone. Carl just kept bringing his knife hand up and down, striking blindly, praying for a vital stab to land. But most of them merely bounced off the thick layers of fur, barely scratching the bear's skin underneath. And then Carl finally got lucky. Just as the animal sank its teeth into Carl's throat and jaw, the blade sank into the beast's left eye, just deep enough to pop the eyeball, covering them both in a spurt of jelly. The bear yelped, sprang back, shook its head, and then went in again. Half-blind and extreme pain was not enough to override the desperation of starvation. It finally had a life-saving meal in front of it. Only death would make it let go now. As for Carl, the damage was already done. He was lying on his back, the left side of his face and scalp torn off, and the wound in his neck spraying blood into the air with the force of an open hose. The arterial spray flecked the bear's already stained fur and splattered on the snow. The contrast between deep red and stark white was like night and day. And it would be that grisly trail that hunters would follow just a few minutes later to find Carl and his attacker. The animal didn't bother finishing Carl off then and there. It could already hear people coming toward them in the distance. Since the man was no longer offering any resistance and the knife lay discarded next to him, it took Carl by his left leg and dragged him out of town. Carl was still gurgling on his own blood, unable to scream, his hands reflexively clawing at his neck as he slid across the ice and snow. The animal stopped in the nearest clump of trees and began to feast for the first time in weeks. Luckily, by that time, Carl had already bled out, so he wasn't alive to suffer through this horrific event too. The men that Becca roused, their rifles at the ready, followed the blood trail at first. When they reached the end of the main road, they didn't need it anymore. They could hear the gluttonous growls emanating from the trees. It wasn't much of a standoff. The animal was so engrossed in the food in front of it that it didn't even realize that there were 5 men surrounding it. When it fell dead, it still had a chunk of Carl's thigh inside its mouth, bringing to an end the first attack on a human by a polar bear in Alaska's modern historical records, and the first polar shot to death because of an attack on a human. They threw the bloodied bear unceremoniously into the back of a truck. This was a small town, and every one of these men knew Carl and his young wife. Their anger and horror at the starving beast was understandable. If they could, they'd have burned the animal then and there. Carl's remains, on the other hand, were handled with reverence and respect. He was retrieved piece by piece and placed inside a wooden box. Every one of the nearly 200 people living in Point Lay handled Carl's remains, or at least the box he was placed in at one point or another. The necropsy on the bear later showed that it was so near death that the muscle in the heart was starting to be digested, the final stage of starvation. The only thing inside of its digestive tract was Carl's remains. As the necropsy went down and Carl's remains were taken to the morgue, Becca was flown to Anchorage. She'd gone into early labor from the stress and a slip on the ice when she ran for help. They exited the helicopter and loaded her into the ambulance, but they never made it to the hospital. Becca gave birth to a healthy baby boy inside the ambulance and named him Carl, after his father. So Carl Stalker won the fight after all. Becca and Carl Jr. made it out alive, and Carl's pointy ears and his hearty laugh has been passed on to 2 new generations since his final affliction.